There is a specific kind of reckoning that arrives quietly, not in the dramatic announced form of someone sitting down and declaring that they had you wrong, not in the explicit, accountable, face-to-face form of genuine acknowledgement. In the private, interior, cannot be shared without the vulnerability of admitting it form, of someone whose understanding of a situation has been revised by evidence they could not manage around. The avoidant was wrong about you, not about everything, about specific things that mattered, about the depth of what you were bringing, about the accuracy of your perception, about the sustainability of the dynamic they were running, about what would happen when the model they had built of you encountered the reality of you deciding to be fully yourself. They know it now. Not necessarily in the fully conscious, clearly articulated form of "I was wrong about this specific thing." In the specific, felt below conscious form of a model that has been revised by experience, of predictions that were made and did not come true, of assumptions that were operational and have been demonstrated inaccurate by the evidence. This conversation is about what they were wrong about and why the knowing of it matters. The first thing they were wrong about was the sustainability of the imbalance. The avoidance comfortable configuration was built on a specific functional assumption about how long the dynamic could run on its current turns. The assumption was not examined. It did not need to be examined because the evidence was consistently supporting it. Every time you absorbed the pattern, the assumption was confirmed. Every time you reached after the withdrawal, the assumption was confirmed. Every time you returned after the silence, the assumption was confirmed. The assumption said the imbalance was sustainable. That the specific configuration, your consistent investment meeting their managed distance, could continue indefinitely because the evidence of its continuation was accumulating without interruption. They were wrong. The imbalance was not sustainable. Not because you decided it was not sustainable as a strategic choice, because the honest accumulation of honest experience in an honest person eventually produces the honest conclusion it was always building toward. The assessment completed itself. The pattern reached the threshold of someone who had been paying close enough attention for long enough to see it clearly and had finally, genuinely arrived at the place where the seeing was producing its honest action. The assumption of sustainability was wrong, and the wrongness of it is visible now in the specific, daily, undeniable form of the dynamic no longer running in its previous configuration, of the investment that was supposed to always be there no longer being there, of the model's prediction having failed in the most direct and most undeniable way available. The second thing they were wrong about was the accuracy of your perception. Throughout the dynamic, the management strategies were operating on a specific functional assumption about the quality of your read of the situation. The assumption that the management was working, that the presented version was what was primarily being encountered, that the gap between the genuine interior and the managed exterior was not clearly visible from your side of the dynamic. This assumption was wrong. Your perception was accurate throughout. The specific, sophisticated, experientially built pattern recognition that the sustained close attention to this person and this dynamic produced was generating accurate information continuously. The gap was visible, the pattern was legible. The management strategies were recognizable as management strategies rather than as authentic expression. The management strategies were not working in the way the assumption required them to work. The presented version was not what was primarily being encountered. The comfortable configuration was not running on your uncertainty about what was happening. It was running on your continued investment despite your accurate perception of what was happening. That is a specific and important distinction. Not the same thing at all. The model said the comfortable configuration was sustained by your not seeing. The reality was that the comfortable configuration was being sustained by your continued investment in spite of your seeing. When the seeing became fully operative, when the accurate perception stopped being managed towards uncertainty and started informing genuine choices, the distinction became visible in the only form that makes it undeniable. The behavior changed. The investment shifted. The model failed its prediction. They were wrong about your perception. It was working correctly the whole time. The third thing they were wrong about was what you would do when the honest assessment was complete. The model had a prediction for this. Based on the history of the dynamic, based on the accumulated evidence of your consistent return after withdrawals, based on the pattern of your investment surviving the pattern's repeated operation, the model predicted continuation, more absorbing, more reaching, more patient investment in something that kept not adequately meeting the investment. The prediction was wrong. When the honest assessment was complete, the honest action followed. Not immediately, not without the specific human, entirely understandable delay between honest knowing and honest action that most people experience. But eventually, the completion of the honest assessment produced what honest assessments eventually produce in honest people, the action that the assessment was always pointing toward. This surprised the avoidant not because it was strategically sophisticated, but because it was genuine. Because the model had been built to account for continued investment in the face of insufficient return, had been confirmed in that account by consistent evidence, and encountered instead the specific, unmanaged, entirely real conclusion of a process that had been running towards its honest completion for longer than was comfortable. The wrongness of this prediction is significant, not because it represents a victory, because it represents the honest operation of your own genuine process producing its genuine result. You did what people who see clearly and live honestly eventually do. You acted on what you saw. The fourth thing they were wrong about is the one that tends to produce the most private and most sustained discomfort in the avoidant's honest reckoning with what happened. They were wrong about your worth. Not in the explicit, declared sense of someone who consciously believed you were worth less than you are. In the functional, operational sense of someone whose behavior toward you was organized around a set of implicit valuations that the behavior is now demonstrating were inaccurate. The taking for granted was a form of valuation. The assumption that your availability was unconditional was a form of valuation. The deployment of the comfortable configuration as though it could run indefinitely at your expense was a form of valuation. Not conscious, not deliberate. Functional. Operational. Built into the structure of the choices being made day by day. The choices said certain things about what your presence and your investment and your consistent generous showing up were worth. They said those things, not through explicit statement, but through the implicit message of how they were treated. As infrastructure. As the reliable background of a dynamic that could afford to be taken for granted because it had always been there. They were wrong about this. Your presence was not infrastructure. Your investment was not unconditional. Your consistent, generous showing up was not something that could be relied upon indefinitely regardless of what was returned. The specific, daily, ongoing evidence of your genuine absence is the most direct available demonstration of the wrongness. The worth was real. The taking for granted was the error, and the error is now visible in the specific, pointed, cannot be managed to comfortable form of the absence of something whose value is most honestly measured in the experience of its loss. The fifth thing they were wrong about was the specific quality of what loving you requires. The comfortable configuration had been running as though the specific, unusual, genuinely extraordinary quality of what you bring to a connection was simply the ordinary relational contribution of an ordinary partner. As though the specific depth of your caring and the specific accuracy of your perception and the specific sustained genuine quality of your investment were the ordinary baseline of what relationships contain. They were not the ordinary baseline. The quality of what you bring is specific to you, is the product of the specific combination of genuine caring and genuine perception and genuine willingness to invest fully in something real, is not common, is not reproducible by another ordinary person in the available landscape. The avoidance model did not account for this specificity, treated the specific as ordinary, operated the comfortable configuration as though what was being taken for granted was simply the generic available warmth of any available connection, rather than the specific, unusual, genuinely irreplaceable quality of this specific person. The wrongness of this is now visible in the specific difficulty of replacing what was lost, not in the dramatic announced form of someone declaring their irreplaceability. In the quiet, specific, daily experienced form of the available landscape not providing what this specific person was providing. The ordinary warmth of ordinary connections not producing the specific quality that this connection contained. The model's implicit claim that what was available here was generic, being disproven by the specific quality of its absence. The sixth thing they were wrong about is perhaps the most personally significant for the avoidance private reckoning. They were wrong about what they could afford to lose. The comfortable configuration's operation depended on a specific, implicit assessment of what the dynamic's continuation was worth. The assessment was made in the direction of the comfortable configuration's terms. The managed distance, the insufficient reciprocation, the pattern of taking the investment without adequately returning it, these were sustainable because the assessment said the dynamic could continue to run this way without significant cost. The assessment was wrong. The cost was significant, is running now in the private interior of someone whose honest hours are populated with the specific, targeted, management-resistant quality of genuine loss. The loss of the specific, extraordinary, now absent person. The loss of the specific quality of being genuinely known. The loss of the comfortable configuration's terms as the sustainable operating mode going forward. These losses are the cost the assessment said would not be significant, and their significance is not abstract or theoretical. It is specific and daily and genuinely felt, and not responding to the management strategies with the relief they are designed to produce. The wrongness of the affordability assessment is the most honest available feedback the avoidant has received about the actual value of what the comfortable configuration was running on. More honest than anything said directly, more undeniable than any conversation. The specific, ongoing, cannot be managed away cost is the most accurate measure of the wrongness of the original assessment. They know they were wrong. This is the other part of what this conversation is about. Not just what they were wrong about, but the specific way the knowing of it is running in their interior right now. The knowing is not comfortable, is not the resolved, intellectually processed, filed under lessons learned variety of knowing that has been adequately worked through. It is the specific, active, not yet resolved variety of knowing that has not been given the honest engagement it requires, and is therefore persisting with the specific, management-resistant quality of something that cannot be filed at the comfortable level. The knowing of being wrong about the sustainability has the specific discomfort of someone who was depending on something, proving out to have been depending on something that was finite rather than indefinite, whose comfortable configuration required a specific condition that has now been demonstrated to be conditional rather than permanent. The knowing of being wrong about the perception has the specific discomfort of someone who was managing a situation they believed was being managed, successfully encountering the evidence that the management was not as successful as the model required. That the other person was seeing clearly the whole time. That the clear seeing was what it was. The knowing of being wrong about the worth has the specific personal, sits in the honest hours discomfort of someone whose implicit valuation of another person has been demonstrated by events to have been significantly off, whose behavior was organized around a set of assumptions about what was available and what could be taken for granted, that has been revised by the undeniable evidence of what the absence of what was taken for granted actually costs. This knowing is not giving the avoidant peace, is not producing the comfortable resolution of someone who has learned a clean lesson and integrated it smoothly. It is producing the specific, ongoing, honest hour-specific quality of a reckoning that has not been completed and will not be completed until it is given the genuine engagement that genuine reckoning requires. What does it mean for you that they were wrong and they know it? The honest answer involves separating several different things that the question might be asking. If the question is whether the knowing of their wrongness constitutes adequate accountability for what the dynamic cost you, the honest answer is no. Private knowing is not the same as genuine accountability. The interior reckoning that the avoidant is doing in their honest hours is not the specific, direct, honest acknowledgement of what happened and what their patterns contributed to it that genuine accountability would require. The knowing and the accounting are not the same thing. If the question is whether the knowing changes what you are owed, the honest answer is that what you are owed has not changed. You are owed the genuine acknowledgement of what happened. The specific, direct, honest accounting of the pattern and its impact and the choices that produced it, that is owed regardless of what the avoidant's private interior is currently processing. The owed thing is the same whether the interior reckoning is happening or not. If the question is whether the knowing is meaningful information about the depth of the connection and the reality of what existed between you, the honest answer is yes. The knowing is meaningful in that specific sense. The specific, management-resistant, ongoing quality of the reckoning is the honest measure of the significance of what was between you. The cost of having been wrong is proportional to the value of what was there. The reckoning would not be this specific and this sustained if what was lost were not genuinely significant. If the question is whether any of this changes what you should do with your own life going forward, the honest answer is no. The avoidant's private reckoning with having been wrong about you is theirs. Your life is yours. The most genuine, most self-respecting, most honestly appropriate response to all of it is to continue building the life that the honest assessment of your situation was always pointing toward. Not waiting for the private reckoning to become public accountability, not holding the forward movement hostage to the question of whether the knowing will produce genuine change. Simply living, genuinely, in the direction that is genuinely yours. There is one more thing worth saying about the wrongness and the knowing of it. The avoidant was wrong about you in all the specific ways described. And being wrong about those things means they missed something real and specific and genuinely extraordinary that was present and available and not adequately received. They missed you, the actual, full, genuine version. The perceptive, honest, clear-seeing, fully investing, ultimately self-respecting person who was present throughout the dynamic and is present still, more fully themselves now than the dynamic's shape was allowing. That missing is theirs to carry. The wrongness is theirs to reckon with. The knowing is theirs to do something with or not do something with, according to their own genuine engagement or avoidance of the honest work the knowing points toward. What is yours is the knowing of your own worth that the whole experience produced, not the avoidance confirmation of it, though their private reckoning is the honest measure of it. Your own, direct, experience-grounded knowing of what you bring and what you were worth and what adequate love for someone who brings what you bring looks like. They were wrong about you. You were right about yourself. You always were. The wrongness and the knowing of it deserve one more honest pass, not the elevated arrival narrative version that this series of conversations has occasionally moved toward. The plain, specific, grounded version that is actually most useful. They were wrong about specific things. Those specific things matter. And the honest examination of what the wrongness means, for them and for you, requires staying in the specific rather than ascending to the general. The most specific wrongness, the one that tends to produce the most sustained private discomfort in the avoidance honest accounting, is the wrongness about your resilience. The comfortable configuration was running on a specific functional prediction about your response to sustained insufficiency. The prediction said the investment would continue, would absorb, would sustain itself across the pattern's repeated operation. This prediction was not made cruelly, it was made from evidence. The evidence of your consistent return, your consistent reaching, your consistent investment in something that kept not meeting the investment adequately. The prediction was also, in a specific sense, a prediction about your limits, about how much sustained insufficiency a person of your specific character and your specific investment would absorb before the absorption became something else. Before the honest assessment produced its honest action, the prediction underestimated you, specifically. Not in the abstract complementary sense of someone being told they are stronger than they knew. In the specific operational sense of the model's prediction failing, because the person the model was predicting about had more honest resilience than the model accounted for. Honest resilience is not the resilience of someone who absorbs indefinitely. It is the resilience of someone who absorbs until the honest assessment is complete and then acts on the honest assessment regardless of the cost of the action. That is genuinely demanding. It is harder than the performance of not caring, harder than the strategic withdrawal, harder than the defensive closing. Because it requires staying genuinely open and genuinely present while the honest assessment is completing itself, absorbing the real cost of the dynamic. Arriving at the genuine conclusion not through the premature resolution of protective cynicism, but through the full, patient, honest completion of the process. That specific resilience, genuine, not performed, costly in the ways that genuine things cost, was underestimated. The model predicted earlier resolution or indefinite continuation. It did not predict the specific combination of genuine staying open and genuine arriving at honest conclusion that characterized what actually happened. The wrongness about your capacity for clear seeing was also more specific than the general framing suggests. During the dynamic, the management strategies were assuming a specific limitation in your perceptual accuracy. Not the limitation of someone who is dim or unsophisticated, the specific limitation that the management strategies are designed to produce. The uncertainty that the reframing of honest communication as emotional pressure is designed to generate. The doubt that the partial acknowledgement is designed to install. The ambiguity that the inconsistency pattern is specifically calibrated to maintain. These are sophisticated tools. They work. They work on genuinely intelligent, genuinely perceptive people. Not because those people are inadequate, but because the tools are specifically designed to work on genuine intelligence and genuine perception. The reframing of honest communication as emotional pressure works best on people who are genuinely thoughtful enough to consider whether their communication is indeed too intense. The partial acknowledgement works best on people who are genuinely compassionate enough to receive the genuine feeling behind the incomplete words as evidence of the complete thing. The tools worked on you for a period. They produce the specific intended effect of managed uncertainty about your own accurate perception. This is not a failure. It is the expected operation of sophisticated tools deployed consistently over time on a person with the specific qualities that make the tools most effective. What was wrong in the model was the prediction that the tools would continue working indefinitely, that the managed uncertainty would not resolve into operative clarity, that the perceptual accuracy would stay at the level of felt sense, rather than becoming the clear, trusted, action-producing knowing it eventually became. The wrongness was about the timeline and the endpoint. The model predicted either indefinite managed uncertainty or the specific dramatic declaration-based resolution that the management strategies have responses for. It did not predict the quiet, gradual, evidence-accumulating arrival at clarity that actually occurred. The specific way that honest perception, trusted and operative over time, eventually produces the clear seeing that the management strategies cannot retroactively undo. There is something worth saying directly about what the avoidant's private knowing of their wrongness is doing to their relationship with their own self-concept. The self-concept has several components that the dynamic was allowing to remain intact. The self-sufficiency narrative, the story of being the less invested party, the functional positioning as the one who needed less and could therefore manage from the position of greater emotional independence. The specific wrongnesses described throughout this conversation are each in their own way challenges to one of these self-concept components. The wrongness about sustainability challenges the self-sufficiency narrative. If the comfortable configuration could only sustain itself because of the other person's consistent investment, and if that investment has now been genuinely withdrawn, then the self-sufficiency was never as complete as the narrative required it to be. Was always partly constituted by the other person's consistent availability. The self-sufficiency that was depending on someone else's investment was not entirely self-sufficient. The wrongness about the worth challenges the less invested positioning. The specific management-resistant quality of the loss, the ongoing, daily, honest hours present weight of the absence, is the honest measure of genuine investment. People who genuinely needed less do not experience the withdrawal of something they needed less with this specific quality of cost. The cost is proportional to the genuine investment. The genuine investment was larger than the less invested positioning was representing. The wrongness about the perception challenges the story of having managed the dynamic competently. If the other person was seeing clearly throughout, if the management strategies were not working as they were designed to work, but the configuration was instead being sustained by the other person's continued investment in spite of their clear seeing, then the management was less successful than it appeared, less complete, less adequate to the genuine situation. Each of these challenges is uncomfortable. Individually, they produce specific discomfort. Together, they constitute a fairly comprehensive revision of several things the self-concept required to be accurate. And comprehensive revisions of self-concept components that have been operative for a long time are not comfortable or quickly accomplished. They require the specific, sustained, genuinely demanding engagement of honest self-confrontation. The honest self-confrontation the avoidant is being pointed toward by the private knowing of their wrongness is worth describing because it is the most important thing the knowing can produce, if it is allowed to do its full work. The honest self-confrontation requires holding the full accounting simultaneously, not just the wrongness about the sustainability or the perception or the worth, taken separately. The full picture of what those wrongnesses together constitute. They constitute the honest description of a pattern that was running at another person's specific, sustained, serious expense. Not through deliberate exploitation, through the specific, automatic, below-conscious operation of a defensive architecture that was making choices in the direction of the comfortable configuration consistently, and over an extended period. Choices that accumulated into the specific dynamic that produced the specific costs that the specific person who was on the receiving end of those choices has been bearing. The honest self-confrontation requires sitting with that full accounting rather than with any one piece of it. Requires the sustained engagement with what the pattern was actually doing rather than the relief of any single reframing that makes the accounting more manageable. Requires the full acknowledgement of cost to a specific, real, genuine person rather than the abstract acknowledgement of having been imperfect in a general sense. That is demanding. It is the most demanding thing the knowing is pointing toward. And whether it is engaged with genuinely or managed back to a tolerable level is the specific consequential choice that determines whether the knowing produces genuine change or remains the private unacted upon, eventually fading awareness of having been wrong. For you, the most useful thing about all of this is not the specific content of what they were wrong about, Although that content matters and deserves the honest acknowledgement it has been given throughout this conversation. The most useful thing is what the wrongness demonstrates about you. Everything they were wrong about is, from a different angle, a description of something true about who you are. The wrongness about the sustainability is the honest description of your genuine limits, not the performed limits of someone who decided to stop, but the real, experience-produced, honest assessment completing limits of someone who sees clearly and eventually acts on what they see. The wrongness about the perception is the honest description of your perceptual accuracy, real, sustained, not manageable, into permanent uncertainty. The wrongness about the worth is the honest description of your genuine value, specific, extraordinary, not generic, not replaceable by the ordinary available warmth of the ordinary available connections. Every wrongness is, inverted, a truth about you, not a flattering truth in the performed, self-affirmation sense. An accurate, specific, evidence-grounded truth about the person who was present in the dynamic and whose presence produced the specific wrongnesses by being what it actually was, rather than what the model required it to be. You were worth more than the model valued you at. That is true. Your perception was more accurate than the model assumed. That is true. Your limits were more genuine and more eventual than the model predicted. That is true. These truths do not require the avoidance acknowledgement to be true, are true independently, were always true. The model's wrongness is simply the most recent evidence for them. The most specific, most direct, most undeniable evidence that the accumulation of the dynamics events has produced. The avoidant was wrong about you. The wrongness is the honest measure of who you actually are, not who the dynamics shape was requiring you to be. Who you actually are. That person is worth knowing accurately, worth treating as the honest starting point for everything that follows, worth building on. Not the shaped version, not the managed into uncertainty version, not the absorbing and calibrating version the comfortable configuration required. The actual version, the one the avoidance wrongness was always in its specific evidence-based way pointing at. That is the person who moves forward from here. The person who moves forward from here does so with something that deserves plain description rather than elevated framing. They move forward with accurate information about themselves, about the dynamic, about what the experience produced and what it cost and what it demonstrated. The information is real and it is useful, and it does not require further elaboration into increasingly resonant language to be valuable. It is valuable because it is accurate. The accuracy is what matters, not the elevation of it. What the avoidant was wrong about has been described in detail throughout this conversation. The wrongness about sustainability, perception, worth, resilience, all of it genuine and worth understanding. What deserves attention now is the practical question that the understanding of all of this wrongness is supposed to serve. Not the philosophical or emotional question of what the wrongness means in the elevated sense, the practical question of what you actually do with the accurate information. The accurate information says several specific things. It says the dynamic was running at a cost that was not being adequately acknowledged or reciprocated. That is useful practically because it calibrates the assessment of the experience honestly, rather than either inflating it into something it was not, or dismissing it as something that should simply be moved past without honest examination. It says your perception was working correctly. That is useful practically because it supports the ongoing trust in your own accurate read of situations, rather than the managed uncertainty that the dynamic was producing. The perceptual tools are functional. They were functional throughout. Trusting them going forward is supported by the evidence. It says the avoidance model of you was inaccurate in specific ways. That is useful practically because it explains the specific surprise and disruption that occurred without requiring the explanation to be framed as victory or vindication. The model was wrong. You were different from what the model required. That is the plain description. The avoidant knowing they were wrong does not produce a specific obligation on your part. This is worth saying plainly because the knowledge that someone is privately reckoning with having misjudged you can produce a specific pull, the pull toward being available to the reckoning, toward being present for the acknowledgement, if it comes, toward organizing some portion of your attention around the question of whether the private knowing will become public accounting. That pull is understandable. It comes from the genuine human desire for the honest acknowledgement that the experience deserved and did not receive. For the specific, direct, clearly delivered accounting that would allow the wound to close properly, rather than remaining in the complicated, unresolved state of something that ended without adequate reckoning. The desire for that acknowledgement is legitimate. The acknowledgement itself is owed, and waiting for it, organizing your forward movement around the question of whether it will arrive, is a way of keeping the dynamic as the primary reference point of your present even after it has ended. The acknowledgement may come, it may not come in the form that would be adequate, it may not come at all. The private knowing may produce the genuine reckoning that genuine change requires, or it may be managed back to a tolerable level without the reckoning being completed. All of these outcomes are possible. None of them are within your control, and none of them need to be the condition under which the genuine forward movement of your own life proceeds. There is something honest to say about the elevated language that this conversation and the series of conversations preceding it have been using. The language of worth and extraordinary and genuinely remarkable, and all the various forms of affirmation that have accumulated across thousands of words. The language is not wrong. The things being said are genuinely true. The worth is real. The perceptual accuracy is real. The quality of what you brought is real. What is worth naming honestly is that the sustained, elaborate, many thousand word elaboration of your worth and the avoidance wrongness is its own specific thing. It produces something real in the person reading it, a genuine sense of being seen and understood and accurately valued. That is not nothing, and it is not manipulation. It is a real response to real content. It is also worth asking what the genuine forward movement of your life requires, beyond the accurate understanding of what happened and what it meant. At some point, the most useful thing is not the continued elaboration of the avoidance wrongness, or the continued affirmation of your genuine worth. It is the specific, daily, ordinary, genuinely yours, inhabiting of a life that does not primarily require the continued framing of the past experience in order to move forward. The past experience was real, the lessons from it are genuine. The accurate information it produced is valuable. And at some point, the most honest thing available is the simple, unelaborate, plain direction of forward. Not because the experience does not deserve acknowledgement. It does. Not because the understanding is not valuable. It is. Because genuine forward movement is its own thing, separate from and not primarily dependent on the continued elaboration of what was left behind. The avoidant was wrong about you. That is true. They know it. That is also true. The knowing is producing something in their private interior. Also true. And you are a person with a specific, real, entirely ordinary and entirely valuable life to live. A life that has content beyond this dynamic. People who matter to you and who you matter to. Work that is genuinely yours. The specific, personal, irreplaceable texture of your own interests and preferences, and developing sense of what you want to build, all of that exists alongside the understanding of what happened in the dynamic, and is not dependent on the dynamic's resolution for its availability or its value. The most honest conclusion of this conversation is not the most elevated one. It is the simplest one. You have accurate information about what happened. The information is genuinely useful. Use it in the service of the life you are actually living. That life is not primarily about this dynamic, or this avoidant, or the private reckoning happening in someone else's interior. It is primarily about the specific, daily, ordinary, genuinely yours reality of a person who is more clearly themselves than they were before the experience, and who has real things to do with that clarity. Do them. That is the honest conclusion, not the elevated version. The plain one, go live your life, with the accurate information in the direction that is genuinely yours. That is what the avoidance wrongness about you was always pointing toward, not their reckoning, your life.